Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Somewhere to Belong by Pizza Yum. Garp and Whitebeard strike a deal, and Luffy, Ace, and Sabo are sent to live with the Whitebeard pirates for 6 months. The trio and crew alike do not know how to handle the situation, but eventually they figure each other out, and the brothers find somewhere they feel like they belong. The Warlord of My Channel are Zach Travis, Garrick Russell, Ben Brownlee, Case Clark, Tristan Ward, KSG PL4Ys, Brian McKenzie. Join the channel membership if you will like to support the channel live. Adios.
CH. 19 separations and plans. Garp sat slumped in his office, completely numb. How did he not see this coming? How could he put his grandsons in this kind of position? He knew that Rob's farm wasn't doing well and that the man had changed since his wife had passed a few years ago. But he had thought under all of that he was still the good man that Garp had saved years ago. He had thought that Rob would at least look after 3 children long enough for other arrangements to be made. The Vice Admiral was a good judge of character. He must have been too focused on getting the boys away from the pirate crew and missed the signs that the man would betray his trust. News of the farmer's death and the Whitebeard pirates' hand in it had reached him. He hadn't been too surprised to find out that the pirates had gone after the boys. Newgate had said they would be, but he was shocked that they had actually killed Rob. He had gotten hold of the old pirate using a transponder snail and had got the whole story from the pirate captain himself. Now he was stuck at headquarters knowing that his grandchildren, his boys, were in the hands of slave trader, and there was little to nothing he could do at this point to stop what he knew would come next. Whitebeard had stated that they would be rescuing the boys and then they would be staying with him. Garp could do nothing but agree. There was practically no chance that they would be accepted into the Navy, and having the boys grow up with a pirate crew was better than them growing up as slaves. Ace shook his foot again, trying to dislodge the piece of sea stone that was wrapped around his ankle. If he could just get it off, then he could burn through the ropes and then save Sabo and Luffy. They would sneak up onto deck and take one of the lifeboats. Ace wasn't sure how long they'd been on the ship, but he knew that with every passing second they were drawing closer and closer to Sabaody and spending the rest of their lives as slaves. The men on board were some people that Ace could have gone his whole life without knowing and be happy. They were rude, loud, smelly, and liked to use him and his brothers as piñatas. Especially Luffy. Once they had discovered Luffy was made out of rubber, instead of putting sea stone on him, they just tied him to the rafters of the ship and took turns hitting him back and forth with various objects. It was a great source of entertainment for them. It had just annoyed Luffy for the most part until one of them brought out a spiked club. Ace shuddered at the images of them beating his brother that would never leave his mind. Luffy had lost consciousness and just woke up a few minutes ago. The doctor had patched him up a bit, saying that they couldn't sail him if he were dead. They'd tied Ace and Sabo up like Luffy too because they had, foolishly, tried to attack the man that had been beating Luffy. They weren't able to do much, weak as they were. After a month of hard labor with almost no food and nearly a week with nothing but a banana and a piece of bread each, and just enough water to keep them alive, they were sick, dehydrated, starving, and weak. The sea stone didn't help either. It seemed to drain all of Ace's strength and he couldn't feel his fire anymore. At least they hadn't put it on Luffy, not yet anyway. The door to their cell opened and Darius appeared. Ace felt himself tense. It was never a good thing when he came to visit. Last time he was here he took Sabo away because he had spit at one of the men to make them leave Ace alone, and when he came back he refused to talk about what had happened. My men tell me that the two have caused them some trouble. He paused as if waiting for them to say something. Ace just glared. We can't have that. We'll be arriving at Sabaody in the morning and I can't have you causing trouble for my men. It sends a bad message to those I want to do business with. He walked to Sabo and put a hand on his cheek and smiled. Sabo tried to move away but was unsuccessful. He laughed at the weak struggles that the blonde was making before pulling his hand. I think that you will all be easier to manage if you're not together. Therefore I've made a decision. Once we reach Sabaody, little Luffy here will be going to the human auction. Ace will be going to a human shop, where they will be able to shut you up and keep you away from people until you're sold off. Sabo, You will be staying with me. I already have a buyer for you. Enjoy your last night with each other." The man laughed and turned to walk out. Ace felt his heart hammering against his chest. His last night with Sabo and Luffy? Ace, was he telling the truth? Are we not going to see each other anymore? Luffy asked. He didn't know how to answer, so he just didn't. I can't do it, Sabo said, shaking his head. I can't be a slave. I won't. Once again Ace didn't know what to say. He had never felt more helpless, hanging there, tied up, his brothers needing comfort, but he couldn't even offer that because he needed it too. He was terrified of what was coming the next day. To have their freedom stolen from them. Possibly forever? It would be worse than death. Maybe Marco will come and save us, Luffy said, ever the optimist. Ace scoffed. Don't be stupid, Luffy. Why would he save us? They gave us up. He felt bad as he saw tears well up in Luffy's eyes. But they didn't want to, Sabo said. Ace knew it was more for Luffy's benefit than anything else. If they wanted them, then they wouldn't have given them back to Garp. Or at least would have come to get them. I don't want to be a slave, Luffy whimpered, trying to hold his tears back. We don't want to be slaves either, Sabo said. Ace looked at the blonde and he knew in that second that Sabo didn't plan on being a slave. He had spent his life trapped by his parents and he wasn't going to be trapped again. Don't worry, Luffy. I'll escape and come save you someday, Ace said. He was pleased when this seemed to cheer his little brother up a bit. If I escape first, I'll come get you. You too, Sabo. Thanks, Luffy, but I think that me and Ace will come get you before you come to get us. Sabo's smile was sad and looked a little forced. Ace felt determination start to grow in him. Sabo, Luffy, he got their attention. I promise you, even if it's the last thing I do, I will escape and I will come for you. We will be together again, no matter what. What if it's not possible? Sabo asked as tears started running down his face. There have been guys way stronger than we are who die as slaves. We're just kids. We won't be allowed to train. They'll want to keep us weak enough to control. I can't be trapped. I won't. I'll die first. There was silence after Sabo's declaration. I refuse to die without trying. Ace stated and looked over to his brother. If I don't at least try to get you, I'll regret it. And you will too. Think about Luffy. Do you really want him to be a slave and die knowing that you did nothing to save him? Ace knew that using their little brother was the only way to make Sabo try to live through this. He wasn't lying when he said he'd rather die than be a slave, but they had to try because without them what would happen to their little brother? Luffy was silent as he watched the two of them talking to each other. That was a low blow, Sabo said softly. He was smiling through his tears. He'll try to save us, but he's too weak, so he needs us to save him, Ace said. And we need to do it fast because he won't last too long without us there to keep him safe. I can take care of myself, Luffy finally said, pouting. Sure you can, Sabo said with a laugh. Then it's decided. We'll both escape, find each other, and then go after Luffy. I bet we can do it in less than a year, Ace said with a smile. And then we can sail the ocean. Just the three of us, and we won't have to worry about anyone or anything else. Just the three of us, Sabo said. It was a nice thought. The three brothers didn't sleep that night. They were all too terrified about what morning would bring. In night, talking about the adventures they would have once they were all together again. It was amusing to talk about the fun they would have, but in the back of his mind Ace knew that if they didn't get help, then the possibility of them seeing each other again was slim to none. That wouldn't stop him from trying though. It had taken longer than what they wanted to reach Sabaody, but here they were. They had to deal with several storms and a few overzealous crews that challenged them. But they made it. Hopefully the brats hadn't been sold off yet. Thatch stood next to Marco and watched as the commanders divided themselves up into groups of 3. He and Marco would be going to the auction house with Haruta. It was the only lead they had on where the brats could be. The rest of the groups would be searching the rest of the mango grove. You know, we would have more of an idea of where to go if you hadn't snapped our only lead's neck, Haruta complained. The blonde just shrugged, looking unapologetic. He was pissing me off. Why didn't you stop him? She asked, turning to Thatch. He just admitted to selling the brats out for 30,000 berry. I was pissed too. Fair enough, she conceded. Is everyone ready? Marco asked, standing in front of the commanders. Luffy's hat still at his side. Pops had put him in charge of this little operation with a promise to take over if need be. As ready as we can be, Izo said. Good, Team 1, we'll go to the auction house. Teams 2 and 3 are in charge of searching the lawless area where most of the slave trading is done. Team 4 is searching the tourist area, and Team 5 is in charge of the shipping area. I have men already set in every dock to make sure that they're not put onto any ships. These are the areas that they will most likely be in. I have some of the crew searching other parts of Sabaody just in case. Our job is to find them and take them back. Pop said that we are to use any means necessary. Any questions? No? Good. Next time we're all back on the Moby, the brats will be with us. Ch. 20 The auction house. Luffy sat in his cell, knees pulled up to his chest, waiting for his turn. He didn't really understand what was happening. All he knew was that he was a slave now, or would be soon, and that Ace and Sabo wanted him to wait for them to come and save him and to just be good and listen. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to escape and go find his brothers. He already missed them. It had been hours ago when Darius had come into their cell, gagged Luffy, and fastened a sea stone cuff around his ankle, just like Ace's, before stuffing him into a sack. The last time he had seen his brothers they looked really angry, but mostly they looked scared, and Luffy didn't like that. Darius had taken him to some strange building and he was dumped onto the floor in front of some weird guy with strange cloths, and the adults started talking about money. While this was happening, someone had took his cloths and held him down while another guy put a collar on him before pushing him into a cell. He hated it. If this was how life was going to be like until Sabo and Ace found him, he wasn't going to stick around. That was for sure. It was boring, the people smelled bad, and the stupid collar was really uncomfortable, and he got yelled at by one of the workers every time he pulled on it to make looser. This is stupid. I hate it here, he mumbled to himself. Shut up, kid, the guy next to him said soft L. None of us want to be here, so shut up. Luffy stuck his tongue out at the man but kept quiet. A few minutes later the guy that had told him to shut up was gone, and if it was anything like the others, he wouldn't be coming back. Number 14, you're up, one of the workers said as he opened the door to Luffy's cell and grabbed the chain that was connected to his collar. He winced as he was pulled forward. They walked through a door and Luffy was backstage. The man reached down and undid the sea stone anklet and pushed him onto stage. He blinked in the bright lights. If he squinted he could make out hundreds, if not thousands, of people looking at him from the audience. The man from before that was talking to Darius was there with a microphone. He was talking excitedly to the crowd and Luffy realized he was talking about him. And now for our next item. He's young, meaning he will last long enough to pass on to your children, and he has a devil fruit power. He ate the gum fruit, and that means that he is entirely made out of rubber. That's right, rubber. The guy reached down and pulled on Luffy's face, stretching his cheek out to demonstrate his powers. Luffy tried to bat him away, but the man released him and reached for a brick that one of the other workers brought him. You can entertain your guest by throwing things at him and seeing how far they bounce. Trust me folks, it's more fun than it sounds. To demonstrate, he threw the brick at Luffy and it bounced off his head. Luffy turned to the man annoyed. He went to pick up the brick and return the favor, but the boy was restrained and the sea stone cuff was back around his ankle, sapping any strength that he had before he could do anything. And look how excitable he is. I'm sure you'll be able to find plenty of fun things to do to him. He winked at the crowd and they laughed. Now, should we start the bidding at say 1 million? Luffy clenched his fist as number after number was called. He sucked in his lips to keep himself from crying. He had to be strong. He had to not cry, no matter how scary it was. Sold. Luffy looked at the crowd and saw a man smiling as if proud of himself. He wanted to look more, but he felt a tug around his neck from the chain and stumbled forward and was forced to follow one of the workers off stage. He was ushered towards a new cell and pushed into it. You'll stay in there until your owner is ready to leave, he was told before the worker walked back towards the stage. Luffy moved to the corner of his small cell and sunk to the ground. He pulled his knees up to his chest and bowed his head. He had just been sold to some guy and he didn't know what to expect. He was humiliated, scared, tired, and angry. He didn't know where his brothers were or when the next time he would see them. He was mad at his grandpa for taking him away from his home. Twice. Mad at Farmer Rob for selling them to Darius. And he missed Marco and the rest of the crew. So he was going to cry a little, but he wasn't going to let anyone see his tears. He was a slave. He was a slave. That meant no more dreams. No more being the next pirate king. No more freedom. Suddenly the collar around his neck seemed to get tighter and Luffy felt as if he couldn't breathe. Marco could laugh at how ridiculously easy it was to sneak backstage of the auction house. He and Thatch had intercepted a couple of workers, knocked them out and stole their uniforms. That's all it took and they had access to everything. "We look ridiculous," Thatch complained in a low voice so that no one but Marco could hear. The other pirate rolled his eyes. "True, but if we can save the brats it'll be worth it, right?" "I guess you're right. But we're changing back before we go outside. No way are we letting Haruta see us like this." "Agreed. If the woman saw them like this there would be no living with her." They were in pink shirts with a ruffled collar, black overalls, had on black pointed hats, and wore sunglasses. They looked like clowns. The two pirates passed the time by bustling around the room where they kept the already sold slaves, looking busy. They were discreetly passing keys to the bomb collars to the poor souls that were locked up. The workers were surprisingly accommodating to new employees, and they already had keys to all the cells and bomb collars that were being used that day. Marco and Thatch were watching as each slave were brought through the door and pushed into cells to wait until their owners were ready to leave. Some left right away, others were still waiting. At least they could grab the brats and leave, saying that their owners were ready to go. It was a good excuse and would give them a pretty good head start. As the auction wore on, Marco became worried that maybe they were too late. Maybe the ship with brats on it had arrived a while ago and the brats had already come and gone. That thought had surprisingly enough not occurred to him before. Which is odd. He was usually a worst-case scenario guy. And then he saw Luffy. The kid stumbled into the room looking exhausted and terrified. He had been stripped of his cloths, just like all the other slaves, and Marco could see the damage that had been done to him. Poor kid was bruised, pale, and shaking. And it looked like someone had beat him with a spiked club and then used tape to fix him up. He watched as Luffy curled up into a corner. His shoulders started shaking and Marco knew that he was crying. All the pirate wanted to do right then was run over the cell and pick the kid up and run out. But he needed to wait for the Bratz brothers. He was surprised when an older man with a long gray beard was the next to come through the door. "I wonder how much the last one is going to go for," he heard one of the workers say to another. "I know, it's not often we get a giant in here. I thought for sure that the Devil Fruit Kid was going to be the big ticket item for the day, but then some guy dragged in a giant and the boss decided to focus on the giant instead of the kid." Marco decided to join in. "Devil Fruit Kid? Really?" "Yup. The small one over there. He went for 40 million. Not as much as the boss was hoping for, but you know how it is." The boss was surprised when Darius actually brought something worthwhile in. He usually just brings in old ladies. He just brought in the one, or were there more? Just the one. Marco felt his heart drop into his stomach. Sabo and Ace weren't here. He excused himself and quickly crossed the room to Thatch. "Luffy's the only one here. Let's get him out and let the others know. I need his key. Number 14. Thatch handed the key over without any more than that. Luffy started to freak out. He started to frantically pull on his bomb collar. "It's too tight. I can't breathe." Marco ran across the room, ignoring everyone around him. He needed to get to Luffy before the damn thing went off. The employees were trying to stop him before the bomb went off, and by the time Marco got there the door was open. He pushed aside the other men and grabbed Luffy's hands and pulled them away from the bomb that was strapped around his neck. "Stop that," he screamed. He needed the brat to stop messing with the damn bomb. "No, it's too tight. I can't breathe. I don't like it." Without thinking, the pirate stuck his finger between the collar and the kid's neck to make sure that it wasn't actually too tight for him to breathe. It was a little tight, but it would be alright until they could take it off, and not tight enough to cause this sort of reaction. Luffy looked up at him and Marco was surprised to see hate in his eyes. Did he not recognize him? The brat was easily tricked and Marco was wearing a disguise. The pirate hoped that's all that it was and that the kid didn't actually hate him. "Oi, take him across the hall until he calms down. We can't have him damaging the other merchandise," the supervisor told Marco, pointing to the door. This was going to be easier than he thought. "No, I don't want to go anywhere. I'll do what I want." Marco shook his head, grateful that he had found Luffy when he did. The kid wouldn't last a day as a slave. "Come on, brat," he said, picking the boy up by the waist and holding him under his arm, like he usually did. Luffy calmed down almost instantly and was now staring up at him with suspicion. He jostled the kid to make him start up again. The last thing he needed was for the supervisor to decide that the brat had calmed down enough and change his mind. They were hoping to get out of here without some sort of fight. Luffy did not disappoint. "Don't do that." Marco looked around for Thatch and noticed he wasn't there. He was probably back at that closet they left their cloths in and was getting their stuff. He shrugged before making his way across the hall. He shut the door and let out a sigh of relief seeing that nobody else was in the room. He quickly set Luffy gently on his feet before pulling out the key and taking off the collar. He wanted to throw it across the room and through a couple of walls, but he thought better of it. He didn't want it exploding and hurting the kid. "What are you doing?" Luffy asked as Marco then took off the shackles around his wrist, frowning when he noticed the sea stone cuff around his ankle. They were going to have to find the key to that before they could leave. He shook his head to clear his thoughts before smiling down at Luffy and focusing all of his attention on the brat. "Come on, don't you recognize me yet?" Luffy looked up at him and cocked his head. The pirate sighed before pulling off the hat and sunglasses. "Marco." He was ready for it when Luffy slammed into him. "I missed you." "Missed you too." Luffy pulled away and smiled up at him. It wasn't quite up to its usual brilliance, but Marco would blame it on the day he was having. Then the smile faded altogether. "Ace and Sabo. I have to find them. We promised we would find each other." "Don't worry. The others are searching for them right now." Darius said that he was giving Ace to a human shop. Sabo was staying with him because somebody already bought him. Marco nodded his head as he digested the information. That would narrow their search for Ace, but they would have to hurry if they were going to save Sabo. It might already be too late. The door opened. Marco stood and took a defensive stance in front of Luffy. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt the brat more than he already was. He sighed in relief when Thatch stepped through the door. Marco smiled down at the kid who was now clutching his leg, looking at the other man in terror. "Don't worry, Luffy. It's just Thatch." "Hey Luffy," Thatch smiled as he pulled off his own hat and glasses. Luffy shot across the room and wrapped his arms around the man's leg. He smiled and patted the boy on the head fondly. "Here," Thatch said, throwing Marco's cloths at him. "Change so we can get out of here." "We can't leave yet." "What? Why not? We have to get the key to the sea stone cuff." "Sea stone?" Thatch asked, eyes widening. His eyes drifted down and his face grew dark when he spotted the cuff. "Those bastards. Stay here and change. I'm pretty sure it won't be hard to get the key." Thatch detached Luffy from his leg and left before the blonde could respond. Marco hurriedly changed out of the hideous clown cloths. Thatch was right, it would take long to find the key. Not with how accommodating everyone was around here. He grabbed his shirt and paused when a straw hat fell out. He had been carrying it with him everywhere for a week now. The only times he had untied it from his side was when he had cleaned it and when they had changed so they could move around the auction house freely. He looked down at Luffy, who was still naked as the day he was born and shivering. He was now examining the shirt Marco had just thrown on the floor, probably deciding if he was going to try to wear it or not. Marco stepped up to him and knelt, wrapping his own shirt around the boy. It would have to do until they got him back the Moby and could get him some proper clothing. No way was the brat wearing that revolting pink thing. Luffy cocked his head to the side and looked up at him in confusion. "This is more comfortable," he said. The small boy nodded and pulled the jacket around him tighter. Marco smiled fondly before grabbing the old straw hat and pushing it firmly onto Luffy's head. "I think you lost this hat." Luffy snatched the hat off his head and hugged it to his chest. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Thatch chose that moment to come back. He looked at the happily cheering Luffy and smiled before throwing Marco a key. "That should be the right one. I told them that number 14's owner was ready to leave." The 1st Division commander wasted no time in unlocking the sea stone, smiling when it came free and fell to the ground. "That better?" he asked his young friend. Luffy smiled and nodded excitedly, hat still clutched to his chest. Thatch, now dressed in his own cloths, smiled down at Luffy. "So what do you say we get out of here?" Luffy cheered, making the two men's smiles widen. Marco had really missed the brat. "Right." Marco scooped Luffy into his arms and held him to his chest. He arranged everything so that it looked like he was carrying a pile of cloths. Anyone who didn't know Luffy was there wouldn't be able to tell that he was carrying a kid. Let's get out of here. Marco and Thatch quickly made their way out of the building. Luckily the auction house wasn't that big, so it didn't take them long. Anyone who saw them didn't say anything but would give Marco strange looks due to his lack of a shirt. "Hey, stop." Marco tensed as one of the workers yelled. He saw Thatch tense up, ready to fight, but then one of the people they had handed a key to earlier ran past them, followed by several of the auction house employees. They traded satisfied looks, happy someone had taken the chance to make a run for it, before making their way towards the meeting place with Haruta. "They weren't there?" she asked once they met up and blinked. "Why aren't you wearing a shirt?" She looked at Marco, eyeing the bundle in his arms. Marco didn't bother answering, he just set Luffy on the ground. "Hi," he chirped, sounding more like himself. She laughed and fell to her knees, throwing her arms around him. "I'm so glad to see you," she said, hugging him tightly. "I need to contact the other teams. Let them know what's going on," Marco said. Thatch responded by holding out the mini transponder snail. "Did you find them?" Namur answered the call. "No hello or how are you. Just business. Ace is in one of the human shops, not entirely sure which one, and I don't know where Sabo is. Apparently he was boogied Sabaody. Start looking for a man named Darius, he's the only lead we got." "Right. And Luffy." A small hand grabbed Marco's wrist and forced the mouthpiece down. "Hi Namur." "Hey Luffy. How you doing?" "I'm good," he said into the mouthpiece before his face grew serious. "But I have to go save Sabo and Ace." "I'm looking for them right now," the fishman responded. "Good, the more people looking the better. You should try extra hard to find Sabo. He's really scared right now. More than Ace. Sabo doesn't like being trapped." "Will do Luffy." "Okay. Bye Namur." He let go of Marco's hand, but instead of running off like Marco had expected, he sat down next to him and leaned against his leg. "I'm sending Thatch and Haruta your way to help with the search," the 1st Division commander stated into the receiver. "You don't need them, nah. I'm heading back to the ship to drop Luffy off and then heading to help Vista and focus the search on the human shops. I'll give him and Izo a call and let their teams know." "Thanks." He replaced the mouthpiece and tossed the snail back to Thatch. "Start searching ships if you have to," he told them. "Find them at all costs." Thatch gave him a look that clearly said, "Duh," before he turned to Luffy and squatted so that he was closer to boy's height. "I'm really glad to see you Luffy. Now I'm going to go help find Sabo and Ace. I'll see you later, okay?" "No, I want to come," Luffy said, stubbornly, crossing his arms across his chest and puffing out his cheeks to let them know that he was serious. It did not have the desired affect considering he was in a shirt 10 times too big and looked as if he was having trouble keeping his eyes open. "Luffy, you need to go back to the ship. I promise that we'll bring Ace and Sabo to you as soon as we find." "No, Ace and Sabo are my brothers. We promised that we would save each other." The tree pirates traded looks, not really knowing what to say. They couldn't really tell him that he wasn't allowed to go look for his brothers. It wasn't really their place. But he looked exhausted and he was hurt. That much was obvious. "Tell you what Luffy," Haruta said, squatting down next to Thatch so she was now face to face with the boy. "How about you go back to the ship with Marco?" "No," Haruta held up a hand to stop any more protests. "Let me finish. You go back to the ship and get rested up. I bet you're tired. While you go rest, we'll go look for Ace and Sabo for you. When we find them, we'll let them know that you are the one who sent them. That way you can still rest like you need to, but it'll still be like you're still looking for your brothers, but we'll just be doing it for you," she finished. Marco and Thatch stared at the woman, wondering if that was actually going to work on Luffy. "What if you don't find them? Then when you feel better you can look for them yourself." Luffy bit his lip. "I promise we'll look really really hard," Thatch said. "Okay, but only for today and only because you're looking for them for me." The 3 pirate commanders let out a breath of relief. It would have been easy to just make him go back to the ship, but they didn't want to do that if they didn't have to. Luffy had been through enough with people making him do stuff he didn't want to do. "I'll be sure to tell Ace and Sabo that you sent us to find them," Thatch said, hugging the boy. "Bye Thatch. Be careful, Darius and his crew are really mean." "They are? Don't worry, I'll be sure to be careful." The dangerous glint in Thatch's eyes promised pain and death for Darius and any of the men under his command. He ruffled the brat's hair before standing and nodding to Marco, and then he and Haruta took off. "You ready to go back to the ship?" the pirate asked his young friend. The kid nodded and stood up. He took 3 steps before falling back down holding his head. "What's wrong?" Marco demanded, concern written on his face. "I'm dizzy," he mumbled, hands grabbing onto his head, as if trying to hold it still. The pirate frowned, wondering what was wrong. He picked the kid up again and situated him so that he was against his chest, and Luffy's head was resting in the crook of his arm. "Come on, the faster we get back, the sooner Lyra can look you over and the sooner you'll feel better. Ch. 21 information and a reunion." Ace was pissed. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been this mad. He had to watch as Darius came into their cell, gagged and tied up his little brother before putting him in a bag and taking him away. Luffy had tried to fight but had been unable to. It was obvious that the younger boy was scared, but he hadn't cried during the entire process. Not even once. It made Ace proud of his brother and more pissed because he couldn't tell Luffy that he was. Not that he would tell Luffy that he was proud, but now he didn't even have the option. Then one of the men had come in and cut the rope that hung him from ceiling. He didn't bother with the gag or anything else. He just picked him up and carried him off. Sabo's terrified voice had followed him out of the small room, and all Ace could think of to say was, "Remember our promise." He had been carried, in broad daylight where anyone could see, to a shop. He was placed on a table and the man that had been carrying him asked, "How much will you give me for him?" They had talked for a few minutes before a deal was struck. Ace was then stripped, scrubbed, had a collar strapped to his neck, given what looked like a burlap sack to wear, and shoved into a small room with a clear wall so that customers could gawk at him. It was annoying, and really didn't improve his mood. Every time one of the overdressed customers even came to look at him, he would give him his darkest glare, the one that promised plenty of pain if they tried to mess with him. At one point the shopkeeper came and knocked on the glass, telling him to behave or he'd be punished. Ace just stuck his tongue out at the man. He didn't like that too much. Ace was taken to a back room and was beaten for his attitude. He'd had worse beatings. They were probably trying not to damage the merchandise too much. That had been hours ago, and now he was mad, and bored, but mostly mad. And the stupid sack itched like crazy. He just needed to figure a way out of here so that he could go back to the ship and rescue Sabo. He remembered where it was. It wouldn't be that difficult to find again as long as he left soon enough. If it wasn't too late already. He glared down at the sea stone cuff that was still around his ankle. If he could get the stupid thing off, then he could get out of here. Probably, if he could get the bomb off soon enough. Out of the corner of his eyes he noticed another group come up to his room and look at him. He huffed and turned to glare at them until they left, only to be shocked out of his mind. Vista, Jiru, and Rikuyo were standing in front of his room. Vista was talking with the shop owner, pointing at Ace. The owner was shaking his head and tried to turn their attention to another slave, but Vista stepped forward and said something to the man. Ace stood and pressed his hands against the glass. Had they actually come after them? Were they here to save him, or were they just passing through? Happened to see him and decided to help? Were they actually here, or was he imagining this? He tried to keep his hope down that they had come specifically for him, but he couldn't help but wish that they had. Rikuyo was watching him and smiled softly. Jiru waved. He slowly waved back, still not sure if he should believe his eyes. Rikuyo motioned for him to move to the side and away from the glass. Ace, not sure why, did as he was told. Vista had been searching the lawless area for a few hours now. He, Jiru, and Rikuyo decided to search the different human shops they saw just to make sure that one of the brats hadn't ended up in one of the shops. He was glad they did after he got Namor's call. Apparently Ace was supposed to be in one of the shops and Sabo was somewhere unknown, so they needed to be on the lookout for a man named Darius. But at least Luffy was safe. That was 1 brat down and 2 to go. He walked into another shop. It was repulsive that there were so many and that the military turned a blind eye. They were supposed to protect all people, not just nobles. "Hello gentlemen. How can I help you on this fine day?" a man asked, appearing out of nowhere. "We're just looking. We'll let you know if we need anything," Rikuyo said, dismissing the man. They walked around the shop looking into the different rooms. "Vista, Rikuyo. Over here," Jiru called. The 2 commanders traded hopeful looks before making their way to Jiru. They smiled when they saw Ace sitting in one of the rooms, glaring at his foot. He looked really annoyed. "Is there something I can help you with now?" The salesman from earlier appeared suddenly. Yes, Vista said. How much for the kid? He asked, pointing to Ace, who was now staring at them in wonder and disbelief. You don't want him. Yes, I do. No, you really don't. We just got him today and he's a bit of a handful. We haven't even had a chance to break him yet. Vista bit back the angry retort. I'll do my own breaking, he said as pleasantly as he could in the situation. Judging by the salesman's face, it hadn't been all that pleasant. No, I really must insist so that I can retain the reputation of this shop. How about a nice young adult? This one over here is very well behaved. This guy had to be the worst salesman ever. Vista was saying that he wanted to buy something and he was trying to talk him into something else. It was really starting to annoy him. No, I want the kid. Why would you have him on display if you weren't going to sell him? The man continued without answering his question. How about? Sell me what I want or you will not be happy about what I do. Please sir, be reasonable. Vista was done talking. They had searched for the brats for weeks and now Ace was standing right in front of him, eyes begging to be freed. He had tried to play nice. He had tried to just pay for Ace's freedom and be done with it, but the man wouldn't get out of his face. He pulled out his swords and, noting that Ace was out of the way, sliced through the glass. Come on, brat. We're leaving. Ace carefully made his way out of the cage and turned toward the pirate, the same disbelieving look on his face. Vista noted that he was wearing what looked like a sack and didn't have any shoes on. What are you doing here? The boy asked. We're looking for you and your brothers. Sorry it took us so long, your grandpa is surprisingly hard to follow. You followed the geezer? We've been looking for you brats for over a month now. So what do you say we get back to the ship? The boy shook his head. I can't. I have to save Luffy and Sabo, I promised. Luffy is safe. He's with Marco and probably back on the Moby by now, Vista said. We're still looking for Sabo. Luffy said that someone called Darius already had a buyer for him, so we're searching for the ship that you guys were on. Hopefully we'll be able to find this Darius and he'll tell us where Sabo is. I can take you to the ship. I know where it is. Well, where it was a few hours ago. Wait just a minute, an annoying voice demanded. Vista frowned. He had forgotten about the salesman. The man latched onto Ace's arm and pulled him away from the pirates. This boy is my property. I paid for him. You can't just take him. That's stealing and the bomb collar will go off if he takes a step outside this shop. Vista watched as Ace's eyes grew wide in fear before narrowing in annoyance before trying to throw the man off. The swordsman stepped forward and grabbed the wrist of the hand that was around Ace's arm. He squeezed the wrist until the salesman released the boy. He gently pulled Ace away and stepped so that he was between the 10-year-old and the shopkeeper. I tried to pay for him but you wouldn't let me. So why don't you just hand over the key to the collar? Rokuyo said, throwing an arm over the salesman's shoulder. And while you're at it, throw in the key to the sea stone cuff around his ankle. Why would I do that? He's worth more dead to me than alive. If I let him leave, the reputation of my shop will. If you don't, you're going to have the wheel with. Rokuyo cut the man off. The salesman's eyes grew wide and shot to look at Jiru's hat as if confirming that they were indeed part of the most notorious crew in the world, including the captain. I'll just go get those keys. Good choice. And be quick about it, Jiru snapped. We're in a hurry. The man scurried off before returning less than 30 seconds later, out of breath. He shoved both keys into Vista's hand. Here, just leave. The swordsman paid no more attention to the man. He turned towards the kid and quickly took off the collar, making the brat smile. Then he bent down to take off the sea stone cuff. The kid's smile grew. That's much better, he said, standing on one foot and rubbed where the cuff had just come off. So you said that you know where Darius's ship is? Jiru asked, turning their attention the next task at hand. Yeah. They didn't cover my eyes or anything when they carried me here, so I know how to get back to the ship. How long ago was that? Ace shrugged. It had been around noon that he was brought here, but he didn't know what time it was now. Hours. Alright then, what are we waiting for? Let's go find that ship. Vista said, pulling out the mini transponder snail and tossing it to Jiru. Call the others and tell them that we have Ace and hopefully a lead on Darius. He knelt down and motioned for Ace to get on his back. The boy gave him a confused look. You're not wearing any shoes. It's not a good idea to walk around barefoot in a place like this. You never know what kind of stuff you might step on. Ace couldn't believe it. He had actually been rescued and Luffy was safe. The Whitebeard pirates had actually come for them. The only thing that was keeping him from outright grinning was the fact that Sabo still needed to be rescued. He directed the 3 pirates towards the Darius's ship and was surprised that it was still there. If it had been him, he would have left right away. Not that he was complaining. "So that's it?" Vista asked. "I've only actually seen the ship twice and only for a few seconds, but I'm pretty sure that's it," he said from the pirate's back. The man refused to put him down no matter how many times Ace insisted that he would be fine. Vista nodded. Jiro was using the transponder snail to inform the other commanders of their location and the fact that Ace was alright. It gave Ace more pleasure than he was willing to admit when he heard a few of the other cheer after hearing that he was alright. "We just need to wait for the others before we make our move," Vista said as he crouched down, keeping an eye on the ship and a hand around Ace's leg so that he wouldn't slide off his back. Ace thought about pointing out that he was made out of fire, so it would matter if he stepped on anything. It would just go through him, but decided against it. If he moved around too much it made him dizzy. Ace stayed where he was, watching the ship with Vista and the others. He clenched his teeth when the man that had used the spiked club on Luffy stepped out on deck. Jiro gave him a look. "I recognize him," he told them, confirming that this was indeed the ship they were looking for. "Who?" A voice Ace had longed to hear for over a month now asked from beside him. His head turned and he saw Thatch smiling at him. Without thinking, Ace launched himself at the man and wrapped his arms around his neck, causing him to laugh quietly. "Did you miss me or something?" "Shut up," Ace mumbled into the man's shoulder. He felt Thatch's arms wrap around him, and for the first time since he could remember he felt completely safe. As if nothing in the world could get to him in that moment. "Hey, I'm going to take him back to the ship. Are you alright without me for a while?" Thatch asked, turning towards Namur. Ace's head shot up. "No, I have to stay. I promised Sabo that I would save him when I escaped. Please don't make me go back without him," he pleaded. "No offense, kid, but you look like crap. I think it would be a good idea for you to get on the ship and go see Lyra. And I know Luffy would like to see you. He was worried about you guys." "You saw Luffy? He's okay. He'll be fine. And so will you and Sabo. Just let us do what we have to do and you will be back with your brothers causing havoc soon enough." Ace bit his lip. He was really tired, cold, his cloths itched, and it would be really nice to see Luffy again. But he had promised Sabo. "Please, if I don't get Sabo back he's going to do something really stupid. I need to get my brother back," he begged. "How about Ace can come onto Darius's ship with us, and if Sabo is not there he goes back to the Moby?" Namur suggested, trying to make a compromise. It wasn't exactly what Ace wanted, but it would have to do. He turned to Thatch. "Fine, but stay close." He smiled at the man. "Thank you." Yeah. The man looked at him and his face grew confused and disgusted. "What on earth are you wearing?" "They made me wear it at the human shop," he said, sticking his tongue out. "It's really itchy." "We'll find something better when we get back to the ship," the man promised with a laugh. "What's everyone waiting around for?" a very familiar voice asked. Ace turned to see Marco standing with one hand on his hip and an eyebrow raised. "We're racing against the clock. I highly doubt that Sabo is still on that ship, so we need to hurry and get the information we need so we can go after him." "Hey Marco," Ace said, imitating the way Luffy would greet the man every time he saw him. "Hey Ace." Thatch pointed to his back and Ace got the message that he still wasn't going to be allowed to walk. He rolled his eyes but climbed onto his friend's back. "Feeling alright?" Marco asked, eyeing him critically. I might be a bit dizzy every now and then, but other than that I'm fine." The pirates around him frowned. "Yeah. Luffy said he was dizzy too," the blonde said thoughtfully. "I wonder why that is." Ace was pretty sure it had to do with the lack of food they had for the past month, but he wasn't about to say anything. He didn't want any of them to worry too much about him or be mad that they hadn't been eating the way they knew they should have. "If you start to feel worse, let me know right away," Thatch commanded before the group started towards the ship. The crew could only watch as the notorious pirates all boarded their ship with ease. "What do you want?" one of them asked. He was one of the ones that liked to hit Luffy back and forth. Ace clenched his fist at the memory of his little brother swinging back and forth, screaming at them to stop. "We're looking for Darius," Marco said casually, stepping forward. "Is he here?" "What do you want with him?" "We have business with him." "What kind of business do you have with me?" And there he was, the man that had allowed them to be tortured and starved. The man that had done something so horrible to Sabo that he refused to talk about it, and the man who took Luffy away. He was just a few feet away. Without thinking, Ace allowed his anger to consume him, and he leapt at the man, fire already raging. Ace! He heard several voices call his name. He was beyond caring though. He kicked the man in the chest and he went down hard. Ace landed on top of him. His arms were swinging before he realized what was going on. He punched the man over and over. He felt Darius grab both his upper arms and try to throw him off. But the hands were suddenly gone, replaced by an arm around his waist trying to pull him away. "That's for putting the sea stone on me," he cried as he put all of his strength behind a punch, making the man's head turn. He was thinking clearer now and knew that he only had a few seconds before he was pulled away, so he had to make every one count. "That's for letting those guys hit Luffy with a spiked club," he said, hitting the man on the other side of his face, causing his head to snap to the other side. The arm stopped trying to tug him away from the man. "That's for making Luffy cry. That's for making us slaves. That's for separating us. That's—" His punches grew weaker with every reason, but then he thought of Sabo and how he had refused to talk about whatever the man did to him, and he felt his anger rise up enough for one more punch. He socked the man right in the nose, smiling when he felt cartilage break. "That's for whatever you did to Sabo that he wouldn't tell me about." Ace was breathing hard as he fully came back to his senses. He looked away from Darius's bloody and broken face and noticed that Namur was holding the man's arms down. He had never seen the fishman look so mad. Not even that time when that guy had attacked Pops and tried to shoot Luffy. He turned to see the rest of the commanders, all with looks of fury. He tried to shrink into himself, worried about whatever punishment was coming his way. The arm around his waist tightened and he was pulled off Darius. "Feel better?" Thatch asked, smiling at him. At least Thatch wasn't mad at him. He shrugged. He did feel better, but now he was really tired and dizzy. He felt a hand wipe his cheeks. He hadn't realized he had been crying. He turned to look at the other commanders again to gauge just how mad they were, but none of them were looking at him. All of their fury was directed towards the man that was bleeding on the floor. Marco stepped forward and grabbed the man by his shirt and forced him up. "Where's Sabo?" he asked in a low voice. Ace shivered at how dark it was. The man smiled. "Now why would I tell you that?" Marco growled. "You captured 3 of my friend's 3 children, sold them into slavery, allowed your men to torture them, messed with their heads. There's probably more, but right now if I knew about it I'm not sure I could stop myself from killing you. Now do you really want to piss me off more, or are you going to tell me where the kid is?" Ace shivered at the power he felt coming from the man. He had never seen anyone this mad before, ever. "He's with a noble heading to the North Blue. They were getting ready to leave about an hour and a half ago." "What kind of ship?" "I don't know, it was really big and purple." Marco smiled coldly at the man. "Thank you. You've been a great help." He flung the man overboard and into the water. He nodded to Namur and the fishman followed the man into the water. Marco turned to face the remaining commanders. "Start calling the crew members that are watching the docks. Ask them if there are any big purple ships getting ready to leave or have already left within the past 6 hours." He walked towards Ace. "You alright?" he asked, concerned. Ace nodded in response as he watched Namur surface, noticing that Darius didn't come with him. "Good. Now Thatch is going to take you to the Moby. I promise you that we will get Sabo back. No matter what. You just worry about yourself for now. Luffy will be happy to see you. You have to find him, fast, he doesn't like being trapped." Luffy said the same thing, Namur said. Ace bit his lip before quietly admitting, he said he would rather die than be a slave, and the guys told us all about the bomb collars and how to make them go off. He said that he wouldn't do anything stupid, but I don't know if he will or not. He doesn't like to be trapped. "Don't worry, Ace," Thatch said. "We'll get him. I bet by this time tomorrow you'll all be together again." "I hope so." The pirate smiled down at him. "Come on, kid." Ace allowed the man to carry him on his back all the way to the dock and into a small boat. Ace shot Thatch a confused look. "If we docked the Moby here it would cause panic, which we don't really need to deal with right now. Not that people aren't panicking anyway, seeing us in this part of the Grand Line. Don't worry, it's not far." Ace sat on the small boat for about 15 minutes before he saw the Moby. It was a sight that he didn't want to admit that he missed. A few minutes later he was climbing on board and was met by cheers. He smiled and waved at the men around him that all looked happy to see him. Huh. They all looked happy to see him. It was a nice feeling. Come on. Pops wants to see you. He said that he would let us do what we needed to get you guys back on the condition you were brought straight to him. Thatch said, putting a hand on Ace's back and started pushing him towards the old man. He couldn't help but smile as he saw an exhausted-looking Luffy, wrapped up in Marco's jacket, sitting on the mighty pirate captain's knee, listening intently as the old man told him a story. The man spotted him and paused in his story, smiling. Luffy, wondering why he stopped, turned to see what he was smiling at. Luffy's face broke into a wide grin. "Ace," he yelled before jumping down and tackling Ace to the ground. This was the best feeling ever. Knowing that he could make his little brother this happy just by being there. "I missed you. You saw me this morning. I know, but I didn't know I was going to see you again so soon, so I missed you." Ace smiled and enclosed his brother in a hug. It felt so nice to hold him. Just because he knew that it made Luffy feel better. The little boy was very affectionate and thrived off of physical affection. He loved it when Ace would ruffle his hair, or bump his arm as if to say good job. But most of all, he loved it when either one of his brothers would hug him. It was something that Sabo and Ace only did when Luffy was hurting in some way. One of the worst parts about being on Darius's ship was that he wasn't able to comfort his little brother the way that he wanted and he knew Luffy craved. He loosened his grip on the younger boy so that he could move away. He wasn't surprised when Luffy clung to him a little tighter. "It's good to see you again, son." The deep voice of the captain got Ace's attention. He looked around to see who he was talking to but saw that he was staring right at him. Was the captain talking to him? He wasn't his son. "You seem a little worse for wear. Come sit with me. I have no doubt that you, like your brother, will refuse to go see Lyra until after Sabo is back." Ace nodded numbly, still shaken by Whitebeard calling him son. He walked forward and was surprised when the man scooped him and Luffy up and placed them on his thigh. "How about we wait for him together?" the old man said kindly before turning towards one of the pirates at his side. "Will you please go fetch some water and maybe a little food? Maybe Luffy will feel like eating now that Ace has joined us and we have a good lead on where to find Sabo." The pirate nodded and ran to do his captain's bidding. "I'm not really hungry," Ace said, holding his stomach. It was strange. They had spent weeks starving and now he didn't want to eat when food was being offered. In fact, the very thought of eating made him slightly sick. "Me neither." "Well, the food will be here for when you want it. Now how about we continue our story?" Ch. 22 Reunited. Sabo shook as he pulled his new shirt over his head and around his collar, wincing as the action pulled at the healing wounds on his back. Sabo swallowed hard as he felt the purple silk against his skin. His master didn't like the thought of his slaves in anything but the best, and as a show of generosity he allowed them to wear the fine cloth. Sabo took a deep shaky breath to calm himself. He was a slave now. He would have to get used to that thought. He had been bought. Someone had actually paid money so that they could own him, and it made him sick. The only thing that kept him from jumping ship and letting the bomb collar do its job was the promise he and his brothers had made. He would keep going as long as he could possibly stand it. For them. He needed to see his brothers again. He would see his brothers again. He just had to bide his time now. "I suggest you wipe that horrified look off your face, boy." An old man wearing the same purple silk uniform snarled at him. "You won't like what happens if you have anything but a smile on your face. These nobles want you to be happy to serve them, so I suggest you act like it." Sabo felt like screaming. After everything was said and done, he was back with the nobles. After he had fought so hard to get away. Oh well, at least he wasn't one of them. He'd rather be a slave than a noble. This family was higher than his own. He couldn't remember the name of his new owner, but he recognized it when he heard it, which meant they were probably a prominent family. Not as high as the celestial dragons, but they were still pretty powerful. He knew this was coming for a while. Darius had dragged him out of his cell a couple of days after forcing them onto his ship. He had given Sabo a beating and whipped him to make sure he would behave himself before he had a video chat with the noble. He had examined Sabo over the video transmission, said that he had nice features and looked clean enough. He had made an offer, and from that moment on Sabo had belonged to him. He didn't have the heart to tell Ace or Luffy, ashamed that he hadn't been able to defend himself or stop the transaction from taking place. Ace probably thought something truly horrible had happened to him because he hadn't told him what happened. At the time he was just in denial that it had happened. The blonde thought that maybe if he didn't say it or acted like it hadn't happened it would make it go away. He was stupid to hope that the entire thing was just a nightmare. He was now on a ship that belonged to a stupid noble family. Everything was the same hideous purple color and he hated it. The old man was now griping at him for something or another. If you don't get your act together you're not going to last. Sabo heard the last of what the old man said. He rolled his eyes. Shut up, he told the old man. You can't talk to me like that. Has no one told you who I am? Why should I care who you are? I am the slave master. In other words, I am your boss. So, you're still just a slave. Like me. The man's face grew red. If you don't watch your tone, boy, you'll be getting a beating. Bring it on, old man. The man slapped Sabo across the face. He was surprised at the strength that was put behind the hit. Don't look so surprised. I have been a slave for many years and had to do hard labor for most of it. I'm stronger than I look. Now, get into the kitchen and start washing dishes unless you want a real beating. Still a little shocked at how strong the man was, Sabo went into the kitchen and started washing dishes. He shook his head to clear his mind. He was acting more like Ace than himself. He needed to be smart about this. Getting on the bad side of his new boss was not going to help. He needed to find out where all the keys were and hopefully he would eventually be able to sneak in to find his own. Then he could run away and find Ace. He sighed. That would be easy. Not. Thatch was ready for this to be over. It hadn't been hard to locate a giant purple ship. Luckily there weren't too many around. But they had been chasing the thing for the past 4 hours. Not that he regretted it. No, he would do anything to see Sabo safe on deck of the Moby again. He was just annoyed at the fact that it had taken them so long to catch up to the ship. They should have been able to get the brat back a lot sooner. Sabo should have never left Sabaody on a ship other than the Moby. He sat on the railing of the ship watching intently as the purple monstrosity grew closer with every passing minute. Marco stood by his side. Is it in range yet? The 1st Division commander asked. Give it another 10 minutes, Thatch responded. It wouldn't be smart for them to start firing until they were sure they were in range. Everyone aboard was preparing for battle. Even Pops, who had spent the past few hours entertaining Luffy and Ace. He probably wanted to keep them close so that he could keep an eye on them. They were going to be the new additions to their family after all. If they agreed to it, Thatch hoped they would. If they agreed to be part of the family, then even Garp couldn't tear them away from Pops and the crew would never have to go through the past few weeks of worry again. They would just have to make sure that the brats grew up strong and knew how to have fun. He really hoped that Pops would let them take the brats to Sabaody Park. It would be just what they needed to get their minds off of what happened the last few weeks. Speaking of the brats, they really were putting them through a lot. Luffy and Ace both refused to see Lyra until Sabo was with them. They refused to eat anything or leave deck 2. None of the crew had the heart to make them do anything they didn't want to at the moment, so they were sitting next to Pops, arms crossed stubbornly as they waited for the action to start. That was okay because at least they were with Pops, which was the safest part of the ship. He blinked, realizing that the purple ship was now within range of their cannons. He smiled and gave the order to fire warning shots. They didn't want to destroy the ship. Not until after Sabo was off of it anyway. Sabo was exhausted. It had been a really long day. After he washed the dishes, he cleaned the stove and then had to scrub the entire deck, by hand, by himself. After that he was forced to clean himself up and then watch as the master ate his dinner. He wasn't allowed to eat when the rest of the slaves ate because he was new and hadn't earned the right to eat yet, so while they ate he cleaned up after dinner. He wasn't all that hungry anyway, at least that's what he told himself. He had just dropped to his designated floor space in the room that was designated for the slaves to sleep when he heard the distinctive sound of a cannon. He sat up. They were being attacked? Who would attack in the dead of night? Actually, there were a lot of people who would do that. The others around him were now sitting up and whispering fearfully to each other. Wimps. Even Luffy could handle some cannon fire and not get scared. He felt a jolt and knew that the ship had been hit. The other slaves around him started to freak out. He just laughed quietly to himself. It would take more than one cannon to sink a ship this size. He would have gone out to watch the action. It was the only exciting thing to happen all day. But the door was locked from the outside, so he was stuck in here with the idiots that were freaking out. There was some more cannons fired and Sabo laid back down. He might as well try to get some sleep. Maybe if the others stayed up then they would be too tired to work and he would be allowed to eat because in comparison it would look like he was working harder. No such luck. The door swung open and the old man was standing there. "Get up. We're under attack. Get to your stations. Your job is to die to protect those on this ship if necessary." "We're fighting?" Sabo asked excitedly. "Don't be stupid, boy. Of course we're not fighting, they wouldn't give us weapons. We're supposed to be human shields." Forget that. This was his chance. The ship was going to be in chaos. He might be able to find the key to his bomb collar if he is quick enough. He felt a hand grab the back of his shirt and yank him towards the deck. "Don't even think about running." He sighed and allowed himself to be manhandled onto deck. He would just have to wait for an opportunity to slip away. The slaves were all on deck, standing around the master, protecting him from any harm that might come. If he were smarter he would stay below deck, then at least he would be better protected. Did he really expect one body to stop a cannonball? Sabo was placed so that he was between the master and the mast. What good this did he didn't know. But at least he'd be able to watch a bit of the action. He couldn't resist taking a peek at the attacking ship and heard himself gasp. He'd know that ship anywhere. It was the Moby. What were they doing attacking a noble's ship? It wasn't really their style. Maybe they would be able to help him, if they didn't blow up the ship first. That was. The cannon fire lasted for about 20 minutes before it suddenly stopped. Sabo turned his head to see what was going on. He was shocked to see Marco, in his phoenix form, headed towards the ship. The boy watched as the pirate changed form mid-air and landed on the deck with a thump. He no longer even tried to look as if he wasn't watching the pirate. It was really nice to see him, and if he got the pirate's attention, then just maybe Sabo would be able to get out of here tonight and start looking for Ace and Luffy. "Sorry for the intrusion. And the cannons. We just needed to get your attention," he said casually. "Why?" the master asked. "Well, you see, I'm looking for a friend of mine. Maybe you've seen him." Marco held up a picture of Sabo that had been taken a few weeks before Garp had dragged him and his brothers away from the Moby. "We've been looking for him for a while and heard that he might be on your ship." All the slaves turned to stare at him. He grinned. Marco was here for him. He tried to call out to the man, but a hand was shoved over his mouth before he could say a word and he was dragged off deck. He turned to see the old man from earlier. "What are you doing?" "Trust me when I say you do not want to cross the master. Not while you still have that thing on." He pointed at the bomb collar around his neck. "He would have set it off if you had said a word." Sabo pushed the man away and tried to run back on deck. He was going to get off this ship one way or another. "Don't be a fool. Wait until you have the collar off before doing anything rash." Sabo turned to stare at the old man in confusion. "Wait until I have my collar off?" "Of course. I know where the keys are kept and have access to them." Why are you helping me? You hate me. A slave's life is a hard one. I would have been doing you no favors if I had been soft on you. I am an old slave and know how cruel this life can be. It is no life for a child. You have someone here who wants you, so I will do anything in my power to make sure that you get back to where you're wanted." Sabo could only nod his thanks at the man as he followed him down the long hallways of the ship. The keys to the bomb collars were kept in a safe box in a desk. The old man knew exactly where to find them and the combination to open the safe. Sabo wondered how often he opened it. He picked out a key and seconds later Sabo was free of his collar. He rubbed his neck, enjoying the feeling of the stupid thing being off. "Now off with you. Get back to your friend as quickly as possible and do try to avoid any gunfire. I can save you from the bomb collar but not from bullets." Sabo nodded. "Thank you, old man. I will never forget this." "Please do. Forget this day ever happened. Go on with your life and never think of this again." Sabo didn't know what to say, so he waved his hand instead and ran back towards the deck. He was surprised to hear swords clashing and guns going off. He flattened himself against the wall as one of the noble's guards was sent flying through the doorway. He peered around the side and felt his eyes widen. There was a full-on battle between the commanders of the Whitebeard pirates and the noble's guards going on. How had things escalated so quickly? He looked towards the Moby and was surprised to see how close it was. He could clearly see Pops, or Captain Whitebeard, watching the battle as if he were waiting for an opportunity to join in. He saw Thatch run by and then backtrack. Sabo? What's going on? He asked the pirate. What happened to your face? The man asked back. Sabo touched his cheek and winced. He had forgotten that he had been hit earlier that day. Thatch ducked an attack and sunk his sword into his attacker before turning back to Sabo, with a large grin on his face. Never mind. Tell me about it later. You have no idea how good it is to see you. We've been trying to track you down for the last month now. The commander swung his sword at an approaching enemy. Now that I found you, we can leave. Thatch motioned for Sabo to come to him and the boy ran to him. Look who I found, he called loudly, getting everyone's attention. The pirates all cheered as Sabo felt an arm wrap around him and lift him up. He turned to see Namur. Come on, you're getting off this ship. And before Sabo could respond, he was carried onto the Moby. And just like that, he was safe. He was free. You alright, kid? Namur asked, staring down at him. He nodded before launching himself at his friend and clinging to him, sobbing. He had been so scared. He had thought that he was going to be a slave the rest of his life, forced to do another's bidding with no one in the world there to care about him. Now he was free and all he had to do was keep his promise to Ace and Luffy. He pushed himself away from the fishman sooner than he would have liked, clearly embarrassed by his actions. Sorry, don't apologize. You can cry. You went through a lot today, a deep voice soothed. Sabo looked up to see Captain Whitebeard standing over him. He was talking to Sabo, but his gaze was still locked on the other ship, watching as each of his sons returned, making sure that no harm would come to them. As soon as Marco, the last to leave the other ship, stepped onto deck, the captain's attention was turned fully to Sabo. Are you hurt? He asked. Sabo didn't know how to answer the question. He wasn't seriously hurt on the other ship, but he had been whipped while with Darius. The wounds were in the process of healing, but some of them were still bleeding a little. His silence seemed to speak for him. As I thought, you will go to see Lyra immediately. Thank you for rescuing me. I really appreciate it, but I don't have time for any of that. I have to find Ace and Luffy, we promised. They are already here and are anxiously waiting to see you, the captain interrupted him. They're here? They're safe? The man nodded once, and that was all Sabo needed to run across deck. He saw his brothers sitting in front of the captain's chair, both with arms crossed, looking upset at something. Ace, Luffy, they both popped up, and before he knew it, he was locked in a three-way hug with his brothers. Ch. 23. A decision is made. Ace sat on a bed in the infirmary watching as Dr. Lyra treated Luffy. After Sabo was back on the Moby, the three boys had been marched down to the infirmary. The nurses took care of anyone that was wounded during the battle while the doctor looked them over personally. She had the same angry look on her face since she had finished examining and treating Ace. It was kind of hard to move wrapped in all the bandages. Ace didn't think he really needed the bandages, but Lyra insisted that he did. He looked over to Sabo, who was sitting next to him, wrapped up just as much as Ace, but he also had an IV sticking out of his arm. Ace cringed as he remembered the marks that covered his brother's back. They were pretty gruesome. Lyra started clicking her tongue as she finished with the last of Luffy's bandages. He was covered almost head to toe. Without a word, she left the room and went to her office. The three boys traded looks. Look, I'm a mummy, Luffy said, standing up and putting his arms in front of him, walking like a zombie across the bed. Ace burst out laughing and Sabo joined him soon enough. Leave it to Luffy to break the tension that the doctor had left. The door to the Dr. Lyra's office burst open and she strode out. She took a deep breath and asked, when was the last time you ate? Ace cocked his head to the side thinking. On Darius's ship, Luffy answered. That's right, it had been while they were with the man. And how long ago was that? Luffy shrugged and looked at Ace, who turned to Sabo. I don't know, there were no windows in that room. I don't even know how long we were on that crummy ship. Alright then. What did you eat? A banana. Luffy answered, happy that he knew the answer this time. And some bread, Ace added, carefully watching the doctor's face grow angrier. Had they done something wrong? Is that it? The three nodded. How much water did they give you? Ace once again turned to Sabo, who shrugged. Enough to stay alive. The woman nodded. And when was the last time you had a decent meal? Ace thought about it. When was the last time they had eaten more than just a piece of fruit or bread a day? That's all Farmer Rob had let them have. With Grandpa, Luffy answered again. Ace blinked when he realized Luffy was right. The last time they had been able to eat an actual meal with meat and everything was when they were with the geezer. Dr. Lyra took a deep breath before marching back to her office and slamming the door shut again. "Why does she keep doing that?" Luffy asked. "Who knows? Adults are weird," Ace shrugged. Luffy laughed and jumped over to the bed that Ace and Sabo were both currently sitting on. Ace couldn't help the small smile that appeared when he watched Luffy snuggle into his pillow. "Hey, that's mine," he said before laying down too. He was tired and still a little dizzy. He hadn't laid in a bed or had a pillow since they left the Moby. It really felt nice. Sabo laid down and rolled on his side that he was facing Luffy and Ace. He smiled as he wrapped an arm around Luffy. Ace did the same. And together the three brothers drifted off to sleep. Sometimes Lyra wished she didn't have the knowledge that she did. Being a doctor was hard, but she loved treating her patients and watching them heal. Knowing she made a difference. She was the best at her job and always had been. Even during her training, at some point she just started to know more than her teacher. But there was a reason she chose to be on a pirate ship and not work in a respectable clinic on some island. She didn't have the heart to watch children die. She found that out when she had been an apprentice. A little girl, a little younger than Ace and Sabo were now, was brought into her teacher's office heavily abused and starved. Someone had found her outside, freezing to death after her parents had decided that they had enough of her and had just thrown her out into the street. Lyra and her teacher had both worked for hours, but the girl had died. Lyra had spent the next week crying because she had to watch a child die and swore she would never do it again. Losing a patient is always hard, but it's 1,000 times worse for her when they were kids. She had given up her apprenticeship and bought a small boat. She only made it to the next island, but it was far enough that she could ignore her failure. 2 years later she had set up a practice in a clinic with another doctor. They worked well together and she was able to choose to treat adults only, and no one questioned her until one night a boy around 5 years old came in with a high fever. She had tried to get someone else to help the boy, but her partner was busy with another patient, so she was the only option. The boy died that night and Lyra went to a bar where she spent 4 months of her life. That's where Pops had found her. That's where Pops had saved her. And now she was forced to treat 3 children on several different occasions. She had almost stopped breathing when Thatch brought Luffy in with that high fever. It was too close to the other boy. But she was nothing if not professional, so she pushed down her own feelings so that she could treat the brats and be done with it. Now all 3 children were in her infirmary, beaten, exhausted, and starving, and she was trying to keep from falling apart. How could anyone hurt those boys? Ace's wounds were all pretty new, only a week old. Probably because his devil fruit had kept him safe from harm until the sea stone had been put on him. He had dark bruises and scratches covered his body that made it obvious that he had been hit many times over the past few weeks. The bruises on his abdomen worried her, and she would need to keep an eye on him for signs of internal bleeding. Sabo had been whipped almost to the point where it could have killed him. The wounds were several days old, but some were still bleeding and the wounds were infected, and she had to put him on an IV to fight the infection. He had less bruises, but probably because Ace tried to keep the attention of the slave traders on himself and spared the other 2. Luffy had been beaten, by the looks of things, often. He didn't have bruises because he was made out of rubber, but he had cuts, more than Sabo and Ace combined. She was horrified when Ace and Sabo said that someone had used him as a piñata and a spiked club as a bat. He too was starting to show signs of infection, and she had given him an antibiotic in pill form because when he had been sick, Sabo had informed her in no uncertain terms that Luffy hated needles and she shouldn't use them unless absolutely necessary. But if he didn't start to get better, then she would be forced to start him on an IV. To top off everything that they had obviously been through, all 3 had been starved. She could tell after examining Ace. His skin and hair didn't look healthy and there was some muscles atrophy. It was no secret on the ship that the 3 boy could out-eat almost anyone on the Moby. The only exception was probably Pops. To be able to eat that much and still be as small as they were, they had some of the fastest metabolisms she had ever seen. At the rate that they usually ate, she was surprised they weren't worse off than they were after being denied a sufficient amount of food for so long. She took a deep breath to steady her nerves. She had a job to do and needed to make sure that the brats all got some food in them and a good night's sleep. She also had to report to Pops. The doctor stood tall as she exited her office and strode back towards her patients. She couldn't help but smile softly when she saw all 3 boys curled up on Ace's bed. She would have preferred them to stay in their own beds, but she couldn't separate them. Not after they had been through so much. Hannah, Iris, she called two of her nurses over. Hannah, please keep an eye on the broths for me. I need to go report to Pops. Iris, I need you to go to the kitchens and get together with one of the chefs and make a meal plan for the boys. We need to really. She was glad that her nurses understood her so well. She had handpicked most of them and each were brilliant and knowledgeable and all of them would understand what was wrong with the boys without her having to explain every little thing to them. I'll bring some beef broth back with me if you'd like, Iris offered. That would be good. Make sure that there is something small for them to eat at all times. We need to make sure that their meals are light and frequent. And make sure that there is plenty of water too. Yes, doctor, both responded and went about doing the tasks that were set. Lyra took another deep breath before turning to the door and walking out of it. She really shouldn't have been surprised to see the hallway full with crewmates. She sighed. They're fine, now get to bed all of you. It has been a long day and no one but Pops is allowed to see the broths right now. Yes, that includes you, Commander, she said looking at Thatch, who looked as if he were going to protest. They need their rest. There were mumbles through the crowd as they dispersed. Really, she had never heard of a pirate crew that had nothing but a bunch of mother hens in it. If someone on board was hurt, then the whole crew wanted to know how they were and to make sure they were all right. It was nice that they cared for each other, but the crew was rather large, so it was difficult to deal with sometimes. She shook her head fondly and the misfits that had become her family before heading to the captain's quarters to give her report. Whitebeard sat in the infirmary all night watching over the three youngsters while they slept. It was nothing he wouldn't do for any of his children that had gone through such a horrific experience. From all the evidence that had been gathered, it was obvious that since they had left the Moby they had been abused in many ways. From what he heard, they were physically, mentally, and emotionally abused by almost everyone they had come into contact with for the last month and a half. The thought of it made him angry. Before Garp had come and reclaimed his grandsons, they were full of life and joy. They had brought an energy to his family that he hadn't known could exist. He enjoyed watching as they formed bonds with his sons and daughters and even himself. He was mad at Garp for taking them away from the safety of his ship and putting them into a situation that allowed them to be enslaved. It wasn't for very long, but it was too long for children so young. He was furious with the man that had brought them to Sabaody. Apparently he had been responsible for many of the injuries that the boys now had. He had also been the one to separate them. He wasn't sure what else the man did, but apparently it was enough for Ace to feel the need to rearrange the man's face. He had been assured that Namur had taken care of the man. He wouldn't be bothering anyone ever again. But he was angry at himself too. If he had started looking for the boys sooner, then maybe some of this could have been avoided. If he hadn't allowed Garp to take them at all, then there wouldn't have even been the possibility of any of this happening. But that would have been cruel. Despite everything that Garp said, and did he really love the brats and just wanted what was the best for them? The Vice Admiral just didn't know how to raise children and should just keep to training Marines. Whitebeard agreed that the man could visit occasionally now that official that they would be living on the Moby until they were old enough to look after themselves. That is if they agreed to it. He refused to be someone that would hold them against their will. If they chose to leave the ship, then he would make sure that they were somewhere safe and that no one who meant them harm could touch them. He was broken out of his thoughts by a small voice. "Hi, Captain Pops." He smiled. He couldn't describe how much joy it brought him that Luffy called him that. "Good morning, Luffy. Did you sleep well?" "Yup, except for when Sabo woke up. His back is hurting." "I heard." Ace was now sitting next to Luffy, rubbing his eyes. "What are you doing here?" he asked bluntly. "Ace, that was rude," Sabo said from his spot where he was still lying in bed. It was probably more comfortable that way with the injuries he had. "Oh, sorry." The old man laughed. "It's fine. I'm a little rude myself when I first wake up." Sorry for the interruption, Pops," a nurse, Alice said with a small bow. "But the boys need to eat before anything else." "Don't be sorry, Alice. They need to be healthy and you're here to see to that." "Is it more meat juice?" Luffy asked. She laughed. "Iris said that you were calling the beef broth that. You woke up earlier and had some, right? Did you like it?" "It's not as good as meat, but it was still good," he said looking thoughtful. "I'll let the chef know that you liked it. Dr. Lyra said that you were going to be on a special diet for a while, so you'll probably get a chance to have it again. In the meantime, I have some freshly squeezed orange juice." "Is that it?" Ace asked, taking his cup. "For now." I'm sure it will probably be enough. If not, I'd be happy to get you some more, but Iris said that you and Luffy had a bit of trouble with the beef broth. Ace didn't say anything more, just started sipping his juice. Remember? Slowly, she told Luffy as she handed him his cup and a spoon. He pouted but took both and slowly spooned the juice into his mouth. She smiled at the boys and turned back to face the captain. I'll be in the office. If you or the boys need anything, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you, child. Seeing the three youngsters slowly drinking their breakfast strengthened his resolve. I am here to ask you three a question, he said. The boys looked up at him, curiosity in their eyes. First, he needed to make sure that it was their choice. Do not feel obligated to say yes. If you don't want to, there are other options. They looked up at him with frightened eyes and he had to wonder what he said wrong. Are you sending us away again? Luffy asked quietly. No, nothing like that. In fact, I want you to take my mark. This time the looks were ones of confusion. Become my sons and you will never be forced to leave if you don't want to. You can grow up strong and free and then find your own place in the world. Does this mean we're going to be pirates? Luffy asked, looking excited. The old man chuckled at the enthusiasm. Not for another few years at least. Oh, he looked disappointed. Why, you want us to stay here? Forever? Ace asked. He looked as if the offer was too good to be true. Of course I do. But you do not have to make your decision now. Think it over. The offer will stand. Even if you say no now, you can always change your minds. He got up to leave but was stopped. Yes, he turned. He hadn't been expecting an answer that quickly. Both Ace and Luffy were looking at Sabo, who was looking straight at the captain. Yes, he repeated. I want to stay. I want a family and I feel like we belong here. The only time I've ever felt like I belonged was when Luffy, Ace, and I were living on our own. I don't want to go back to having no one in the world. But you have to promise that no one can take us away ever again and that my brothers and I will always be together. He studied the boy. He looked hopeful, scared, and determined all at the same time. The old captain smiled kindly. I promise that as long as it is within my power you will never be taken away and that you and your brothers will be together. The boy was satisfied with the promise. Well, if Sabo is staying, I'll stay, Ace said with a shrug, but he looked as if he were fighting to keep a straight face. The youngest looked distressed though. What about Grandpa? He asked. Won't he be sad? The man smiled at the boy's thoughtfulness. I've already talked to him. We came to an agreement that if this is what you wanted, then this is what was best. Luffy nodded thoughtfully. Then I want to stay too. I like it here. The man smiled. I'm glad to have you back with us, my sons. Ch. 24 family. Ace watched as Izo made sure that Luffy's new cloths fit with smile, waiting for his turn. He liked getting new cloths. It reminded him of the times Makino had dropped by Dayton's place and had brought them all something new to wear. It had been really thoughtful of her, especially since the first time, since she didn't even know that he and Sabo existed until she met them. Luffy had told her they were his brothers and she treated them with the same kindness she had shown Luffy. It was the first time Ace could ever remember an adult being nice to him. He wondered what she was up to. Maybe there was a way he could send her a letter or something, let her know that they were all right. She was probably worried about them. They hadn't even gotten to say goodbye to her when they left with the geezer. Alright, everything looks good, Izo said as Luffy looked over his new t-shirt with a smile on his face. It was red, his favorite color, and had a pocket with the same mark that Marco had, but the mark was white so that it would show up well on the red. Ace could tell that Luffy was excited about the shirt. He also had on blue shorts on, and Izo had also been able to find some sandals just like the ones Luffy had before. Do you like your new cloths? The pirate asked. Luffy nodded his head. I love them. Sabo had already been fitted with a blue shirt. The mark was on the back of the shirt and much larger than Luffy's. The shoes Izo had picked out were too small and he would need to get new ones, so he was forced to wear the ugly purple slipper things he had been wearing when he had been rescued for now. But other than that, his cloths seemed to be fine. Alright Ace, you're up. Ace stepped forward and pulled on the cloths that Izo picked out for him. Black shorts and an orange shirt. Whitebeard's mark in white like his brother's, but it covered the front. He also pulled on the socks and tennis shoes. They were a lot more comfortable than any shoes Ace had before. And the fabric of the clothing felt nicer than anything he was used to. How does everything feel? It's great, he answered with a smile. Good. Now hold out a foot. I want to make sure that the shoes aren't too tight. Ace did as he was told, and Izo felt the shoe and placed his finger so that he could feel the end of Ace's toe and frowned. Are they too loose? They seem a bit big. Ace shook his foot and the shoe stayed on, so it would be fine. They're okay. Are you sure? I don't mind exchanging them. No, they're great. Thank you. The man smiled kindly. No problem. I just hope that you like everything I picked out. This isn't it? Ace asked. They had just been offered a permanent spot on the ship and already they were becoming a burden. Of course not. You all can't run around in the same cloths day after day, it's unhygienic. What's unhygiene thingy? Luffy asked. It means that it's dirty and makes you smell bad, Sabo said automatically. Oh. Ace shook his head at the pirate. But how much did all of this cost? We don't want you to spend. Izo gently bopped him on the head. There's plenty of money to cover your expenses. You're kids. You're not supposed to worry about stuff like that. You're part of the family now, so until you're older we'll worry about that stuff for you. But I don't want to hear another word. Just be sure to thank Pops. Ace nodded, still concerned about the price. Dayton hadn't liked having to spend money on him. She said that it made him even more of a burden. Alright then, if everything fits I'm going to go and make sure that your room is done being set up. I'm glad you're all feeling better. Bye Izo, Luffy said, waving as the man left, smiling wide when he turned and waved back to Luffy before closing the door behind him. They were still in the infirmary and all of them were eagerly waiting for Lyra to come check the over one last time so that they could leave. She had said yesterday that there was a good chance that they would be able to leave today. Ace really hoped so. He wanted to see Thatch again. Dr. Lyra had said that no one was allowed in to see them so that they could get enough rest. It was frustrating and he really wanted to see his friend, but Thatch and the rest of the crew were too afraid of Lyra to go against her orders for some reason. A few minutes later the woman walked in and gave them all a calculating look before breaking into a smile. I like your new cloths. It was the first time Ace could remember her looking happy. It was kind of freaking him out a little. They're awesome, Luff cheered. They sure are. Now who's first? Luffy raised his hand, volunteering to go first. Ace was sure that he didn't know what he had volunteered for. 30 minutes later they were given explicit instructions to not eat anything that wasn't approved of by the chefs, who had been given a list of foods they were allowed to eat for the next couple of weeks. They were also told that if they got tired they were to stop what they were doing and take a break, and if they felt any pain they were to come straight to her. And then Dr. Lyra said that they were free to go. As soon as the words passed her lips Luffy was out the door with Ace and Sabo close behind him. Marco let the pen drop out of his hand and let his head slam down onto his desk with a dull thunk. He was done. He was finally all caught up on all his work. It was a glorious feeling. Too bad it couldn't last longer. There was a knock at his door. Come in, he called, not bothering to pick up his head. Long day? Thatch asked. You have no idea. I do too. I lead my own division, you know. True, but I am now leading too. He held up two fingers to make his point. And did you forget that you report to me and I decide what's important enough to let Pops know about? Hey, he's just getting you ready to take over when he's finally is too old to do all the captain stuff, Thatch said nonchalantly. Don't joke about stuff like that. Marco responded, turning his head and glaring at the other man. He didn't like to think about the fact that his father was getting older. Sorry, Marco groaned as he finally picked his head up off the desk and sat up. So have you seen the brats yet? It had been almost a week since the brats had all been back on the ship and no one but Pops and medical personnel were allowed to see them. Not even the commanders were allowed in. And anyone who crossed those orders had to not only deal with the she-devil but Pops as well. No, the witch is in rare form these days. Although I do know that there have been nurses running back and forth between the infirmary and the kitchen at odd hours. And Izo was sent to Sabaody for cloths. Well, all of the brats' things were burned and there's nothing on board that would fit them. We established that with the codes. I still wish you hadn't killed that farmer so that I could punch him in the face a few times before killing him myself. What those kids went through because of him. He took a deep breath, cutting himself off. Relax, he's already been taken care of, so there's no need to talk about him again. Ever. How about we go get some dinner? Breakfast. What? You worked through the night? The blonde sighed. Of course I did. Thatch threw an arm over his shoulder. Come on brother, take a break and get something to eat. You deserve it. Yes. I do deserve it. I worked all night and now I'm finished. Really? Does that mean you'll be able to relax a little? Marco knew that Thatch was only kind of joking. Shut up, he said, pushing past his friend. He walked out of his room and took a deep breath of fresh air. In the distance he could still see the Sabaody archipelago. He wasn't sure why, but they were waiting around until the brats were feeling better before heading back to the New World. Marco had a feeling that the waiting had something to do with Haruta, Namur, Thatch, and Sabaody Park. If his suspicions were true, he might have to get in on that. That is, if they were allowed anywhere near the place. He was certain, tall on the edge, trying to figure out what they were doing here in paradise and itching to take them down. Like that could ever happen. At breakfast he sat with a few of the boys from his division and chatted idly with them. After the meal he made his way onto the deck and decided to sit with Pops for a while. He was tired and should probably go take a nap, but it felt good to have nothing waiting for him back in his room, and he was going to take advantage of it until he had to deal with something else. He watched as the crew came to life, as those who liked to sleep in woke up and joined them in the daily chores that were required to run a ship this size. It was fun to sit back and watch his brothers and sisters interact. Occasionally someone would come and strike up a conversation with him before running off to do an appointed task. About an hour before lunch he found himself chatting with Haruta about her need for a new sword. Apparently she had found one in a shop in the tourist district on Sabaody and was debating on whether or not it was worth the money. Just get it, he told her. She was usually responsible with money, so he didn't have trouble telling her to get something for herself every now and then. They were interrupted by 3 small blurs running past them. Marco felt his face split into a grin. The brats were loose. The 3 blurs stopped in front of the old man, and all 3 boys had wide grins on their faces. Thanks for the cloths, Pops, Ace said. The other 2 also expressed their gratitude in a similar manner. Pops? Did that mean he had already asked them? He looked at Sabo and saw the second symbol displayed proudly on the back of his shirt. Anytime, my sons. Marco felt his excitement grow. It was official now. The brats were staying. He had 3 new brothers. And not even Garp was going to be able to take them away again. The 3 boys all had bandages still visible, but they looked much better than the last time Marco had seen them. They no longer looked exhausted, but it would seem that they had lost weight during their time away. He was broken out of his thoughts when he felt a light weight hit him in the chest. He looked down to see Luffy smiling up at him. Hi Marco. Hey Luffy. Look, he said proudly, pointing to his pocket. Just like yours. Marco looked at the shirt and felt his smile grow. It was Pop's mark, all right. He was pleased beyond all words to see it. He looked over to see Ace and Thatch scheming a little ways away and saw that he too had a mark on his shirt. He glanced over to see Namur and Sabo, the mark showing proudly on his back, talking to each other excitedly. He caught the words Fishman Island and knew that they would be making a stop on the way back so that Namur could show the brats his home island. Good. That meant that anyone who even thought about messing with the brats would think twice and know exactly who they'd be challenging if they did. It would keep them safe. It sure is. Do you know what it means? The boy shook his head. No, it means that we're family now. Luffy gave him the most dazzling smile he had ever seen. For that moment everything was right in the world.